The transition was not a flash of light or a thunderclap, but a silent, microscopic restructuring of reality. At the atomic level, the traveler's cellular matrix vibrated in a frequency that did not belong to this dimension. For a fraction of a second, his consciousness existed in a state of quantum superposition, a singular entity smeared across two differing versions of the laws of physics. Then, the integration finalized. Kal-El felt the weight of a sun that was not his own. The radiation was familiar, G-type, yellow, but the flavor was different, tainted by a terrestrial atmosphere, thick with a chemical signature he could not yet name. He was suspended 30,000 feet above the Atlantic Ocean. To a human observer, he would have appeared as a stationary blur against the stratospheric blue. To him, the world was moving in agonizingly slow motion. His auditory cortex, hypersensitized by the sudden shift in atmospheric pressure, began to filter the cacophony of the planet. He bypassed the hum of tectonic plates and the rhythmic pulse of coastal tides, narrowing his focus to a specific, jagged frequency. It was the sound of aluminum alloy, 7075T6, groaning under extreme torsional stress. It was the scream of air rushing through a pressurized cabin at 400 knots. And beneath that, the staccato, a rhythmic thumping of 123 human hearts, all spiking into the range of 180 beats per minute. Adrenaline, cortisol. The chemical scent of terror reached his olfactory receptors before he saw the source. 5 miles to his northeast, Transoceanic Flight 37 was a dying bird. The cockpit was a jagged wound of twisted metal and shattered glass. The engines were dead, the turbines seized into useless lumps of heat-warped iron. He moved. To the passengers inside, the world was a chaotic blur of falling oxygen masks and the roar of the sky. To the man in the blue suit, the journey was a clinical exercise in trajectory. He did not simply fly, he manipulated the gravitational constant around his own mass, accelerating with a precision that bypassed the sonic boom that would have otherwise shattered the plane's windows. He arrived at the fuselage in the space between two heartbeats. Through the silver skin of the aircraft, he could see them with X-ray clarity. He saw the skeletal structures of families huddled together, the calcified terror in their joints. He also saw something he did not expect. There was another individual, a man in a cape of stars and stripes, standing in the aisle with an expression of profound, chilling boredom. This man's heart did not race. It beat with a slow, predatory rhythm, unburdened by the empathy that usually accompanies the sight of impending mass death. "There's no way to stop it," the man in the stars and stripes said, his voice carrying a localized frequency of practiced, hollow regret. "The controls are fried. If I try to lift it, my arms will just go through the hull. Physics, right? It's a bitch." The traveler did not wait for an introduction. He understood the physics better than the man in the cabin. He knew that the structural integrity of the plane was failing, but he also knew that force could be distributed. He descended beneath the belly of the Boeing 737. His tactile senses mapped the vibrations of the entire airframe. He identified the primary load-bearing spars, the skeletal spine of the machine. He did not simply push. A direct application of his strength would, as the other man predicted, pierce the aluminum skin like a needle through silk. Instead, he expanded his bioelectric field, the very aura that protected his own suit from friction, and wrapped it around the undercarriage. He became a secondary fuselage. The weight of the plane was approximately 150,000 pounds. To his muscles, nurtured by a heavier gravity and a purer sun, this was a negligible mass. The true challenge was the velocity. He began to apply a reverse vector of force, a gradual deceleration designed to prevent the passengers' brains from colliding with the interior of their skulls. Inside the cabin, the man in the stars and stripes, Homelander, felt the floor stabilize. His eyes, glowing with a latent heat, narrowed in confusion. He stepped toward the window, looking down. He saw a man, not a Vought-engineered product, not a soup he recognized from the marketing spreadsheets. He saw a man whose eyes were not filled with the cold fire of ego, but with a terrifying, absolute focus. The traveler made eye contact through the floorboards, through the baggage hold, through the steel. It was a gaze that stripped Homelander of his divinity. Superman began to tilt the nose of the aircraft upward. He used the air resistance as a brake, his hands molded to the landing gear assembly with a grip that redistributed the pressure across the entire wingspan. The metal shrieked, protesting the sudden shift in momentum, but the traveler's aura acted as a dampening field, absorbing the structural shocks. Slowly, the descent curve flattened. The ocean, which had been a hungry, gray maw rising to claim them, began to recede. He guided the plane toward the coast, a silent engine of salvation. He could hear the passengers now. The screams of terror were transitioning into the ragged, sobbing gasps of the realization of life. He heard a child in seat 14B asking her mother if the angel had caught them. The traveler's heart remained steady, a calm, rhythmic reassurance to any who could hear it. He was not thinking about the man in the stars and stripes who watched him with growing, silent hatred. He was not thinking about the political ramifications of his arrival in a world that didn't know him. He was thinking about the exact pressure required to set the plane down on the soft sands of a beach without snapping the landing gear. When the wheels finally touched the shoreline of an isolated cove, the impact was no more violent than a bird landing on a branch. The traveler held the weight for exactly 3 minutes longer, ensuring the structural stresses had fully dissipated before he let go. He stood on the sand, the sun of this strange, cynical world warming his face. Behind him, the emergency slides deployed with a series of muffled pops. The passengers began to spill out, weeping, vomiting, and falling to their knees. The man in the stars and stripes floated down from the cabin door, his boots hovering an inch above the sand. He looked at the traveler, his jaw tight, his public relations smile flickering like a dying bulb. "Who the hell are you?" Homelander asked. The traveler looked at the survivors. He saw a woman hugging her son. He saw an old man staring at the sky in disbelief. He looked back at the man in the cape, and for the first time, he felt the underlying rot of this universe. It was a coldness in the air, a lack of fundamental decency in the man standing before him. "A friend," the traveler replied. His voice was not a challenge, but a statement of fact that seemed to reshape the atmosphere around them. "And you look like you could use some help." The traveler saw the micro-twitches in Homelander's facial muscles, the sign of a man whose world had just been irrevocably broken. The traveler didn't need to know the history of Vought or the Seven to know that the status quo had ended the moment he caught that plane. The silence that followed the landing was not peaceful, it was heavy, pressurized by the sudden absence of the screaming engines. On the damp sand of the cove, the only sounds were the rhythmic lap of the Atlantic and the frantic, wet gasps of the survivors. To the man in the blue suit, the world was a map of thermal signatures and trembling nervous systems. He stood perfectly still, his cape caught in the sea breeze, a vibrant primary color that seemed to reject the muted, gray reality of the coastline. He was observing the man in the stars and stripes. Homelander's physiological response was a fascinating study in suppressed volatility. His heart, which had been beating with the steady, arrogant thrum of a predator, began to skip. The rhythm became erratic, a gallop of cortisol-fueled panic. His masseter muscles flickered beneath the skin of his jaw, a mechanical tick of a man whose internal architecture was built on the foundation of being the singular apex. "A friend," Homelander repeated. The words were thin, brittle things. He stepped closer, his boots sinking into the sand, a stark contrast to the traveler who seemed to barely disturb the surface. That's a hell of a stunt, friend." "We had it under control, of course. Standard high-altitude rescue protocol. I was just about to—" "You told them there was no way to stop it." The traveler's voice was low, carrying a resonance that bypasses the ear and vibrates directly in the chest cavity. It was not an accusation. It was a clinical observation of a recorded fact. Homelander's smile didn't drop. It fossilized. His pupils, usually wide and commanding, constricted into needle points of blue ice. He glanced toward the survivors. A woman, her face smeared with soot and tears, was holding a smartphone. The lens was pointed directly at them. The light of the recording indicator was a tiny red eye, witnessing the death of a narrative. In that microsecond, the air between the two men ionized. Homelander's internal temperature spiked. The chemical precursors to his heat vision began to pool in the ocular cavities, a bioluminescent buildup of pure, destructive energy. To a human, it would look like his eyes were merely glowing. To the traveler, it was the equivalent of a predator baring its fangs. "Listen, newbie," Homelander whispered, his voice dropping into a frequency intended only for the man in front of him. "I don't know what circus you crawled out of, or what kind of V cocktail you're running in those veins, but this is my sky. These are my people. You don't just fly in here and make me look like a liar." The traveler didn't flinch. He didn't even adopt a defensive posture. He simply looked at the man, really looked at him. His X-ray vision pierced the patriotic spandex, the reinforced muscle tissue, and the dense bone structure. He saw the truth of the man's biology, a heart that had never known a resting state of peace, a nervous system perpetually on the brink of a fight-or-flight response. He saw a creature of incredible power who was, at his core, a frightened child screaming for validation in a vacuum. The traveler felt a profound clinical pity. "The cockpit door is melted," the traveler said softly. "The metal shows signs of concentrated heat stress, not from friction, from focused radiation." He paused, allowing the implication to hang in the salt air. "You didn't just fail to save them. You broke the plane." The revelation hit Homelander with the force of a physical blow. The lethal mistake he had made in the cockpit, the impulsive burst of heat vision that had decapitated the pilots and fried the avionics, was no longer a secret buried at the bottom of the ocean. It was a recorded fact, held in the mind of a witness who could not be intimidated. Homelander's right hand twitched. He was calculating the time it would take to punch through the traveler's chest, to incinerate the woman with the phone, and to crash the plane himself to finish the job. He estimated the distance, 4 meters. He estimated the time, 0.04 seconds. He moved. He didn't fly, he lunged, a blur of motion that should have been invisible to the human eye. His fist, backed by the force of a falling building, aimed for the traveler's throat. The traveler didn't move away. He moved with. In the span of a single millisecond, the traveler perceived the world as a static photograph. He saw the individual grains of sand kicked up by Homelander's boot, suspended in the air like diamonds. He saw the sweat on Homelander's brow. He reached out, his hand moving with a fluidity that defied the laws of inertia. He didn't strike back. He simply caught Homelander's wrist. The impact should have created a shock wave that leveled the nearby dunes. Instead, the traveler absorbed the kinetic energy into his own frame, grounding the force through his heels into the earth. The sand beneath them turned to glass instantly from the sheer pressure, but the sound was nothing more than a dull thud. Homelander froze. His arm, capable of lifting tanks, was held in a grip that felt like the closing of a tectonic plate. He pulled. Nothing. He used his flight to provide leverage, his boots lifting off the ground as he strained against the traveler's hold. The traveler looked up at him, his expression one of calm, unwavering disappointment. "You have a choice," the traveler said. "You can help me get these people to safety, or you can find out exactly how much stronger I am than you." From the shadows of the plane's wreckage, more survivors were emerging. They weren't cheering for Homelander. They were staring at the man in the blue suit, the man who had done the impossible. Homelander's breathing was ragged. His face was a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred, but beneath it, the cold logic of self-preservation began to take hold. He couldn't kill this man here. Not with the cameras, not with the survivors. "Fine," Homelander spat, his voice trembling with a rage he couldn't entirely hide. He wrenched his arm back as the traveler released the grip. "We'll do it your way, for now." He turned toward the survivors, his hero persona snapping back into place like a jagged piece of glass. "Everyone, listen up!" Homelander shouted, his voice booming with artificial warmth. "My partner and I have secured the area. Everything is under control. We're going to get you home." The traveler didn't join him in the spotlight. He walked toward the woman with the child, his steps heavy and purposeful. He knelt in the sand, ignoring the cameras, ignoring the God King and the stars and stripes. "Are you hurt?" he asked the child. The boy looked at the giant S on the man's chest. He didn't see a brand. He didn't see a corporate logo. He saw a promise. "No," the boy whispered. "Are you a real hero?" The traveler smiled, and for a moment, the gray, cynical atmosphere of this world seemed to brighten. "I'm someone who can help," he said, "and right now, that's enough." High above, a Vought surveillance drone hummed, its lens zooming in on the interloper. In a boardroom thousands of miles away, the gears of a massive, predatory machine began to turn. The traveler had saved the plane, but he had declared war on an empire he didn't even know existed. The Vought International boardroom, located on the 99th floor of 7 Tower, was a vacuum of clinical silence. On the primary panoramic display, the footage from the Atlantic coastline was playing in a continuous, high-definition loop. Ashley Barrett, the senior VP of Hero Management, felt a familiar, rhythmic throbbing in her left temple. Her fingers were white-knocked as she gripped the edge of the mahogany table. She wasn't looking at the rescue. She was looking at the data. The biometric sensors embedded in Homelander's suit, the ones designed to monitor his vitals for marketing intensity metrics, had spiked into a range that the software flagged as fatal cardiac event. But Homelander wasn't having a heart attack. He was experiencing a systematic collapse of his reality. "Frame 403, a voice commanded from the shadows of the head of the table. The image froze. It was the moment the traveler caught Homelander's fist. To the naked eye, it looked like a handshake between titans. To the Vought analysts, it was a catastrophe. The thermal sensors showed the traveler's body temperature remained a perfect 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit, even as he absorbed a kinetic impact estimated at 4.2 million newtons. "He didn't just stop him," the voice continued, belonging to a man whose silhouette was as sharp as a scalpel. "He grounded the energy. He treated our most expensive asset like a temperamental child." The traveler on the screen wasn't looking at the camera. He was lifting a piece of heavy landing gear off a trapped passenger's leg, moving the 2-ton mass of steel as if it were made of balsa wood. "Who is he?" Ashley whispered, her voice cracking. "Is he a Godolkin dropout? A Russian black op?" "He's not ours," the voice replied. "Search the Compound V registries. Search the illegal labs in the Levant. Search the genetic archives of the Third Reich. You will find nothing. He is a biological impossibility. He is..." An outside variable. 500 miles away, the outside variable was walking through the makeshift triage center established by local emergency services. The traveler, Kal-El, felt the weight of 10,000 eyes. In his own world, the gaze of the public was often one of gratitude or wonder. Here, the air was thick with a different chemical compound, suspicion. He could hear the whispers of the first responders. They weren't asking if he was okay. They were asking who he repped. They were looking for the corporate logo on his cape, the sponsor patch on his shoulder. When they found none, their confusion turned into a primal, low-level fear. In this world, power without a brand was a weapon without a safety catch. You need to leave. The voice was hushed, urgent. It came from a paramedic, a man in his late 50s with deep creases of exhaustion around his eyes. He was bandaging a survivor's arm, but his focus was entirely on the man in blue. "I'm helping," Kal-El said, his voice modulated to a frequency of gentle reassurance. "No!" the paramedic hissed, glancing toward a black SUV that had just pulled onto the sand, bearing the Vought V on its door. "You're a glitch in the software, pal. Look at him." He nodded toward the far end of the beach. Homelander was surrounded by a phalanx of Vought tactical teams and PR handlers. They were wiping the sand from his boots and applying high-definition makeup to hide the bruising on his wrist. Homelander was staring at Kal-El, his eyes not glowing, but narrowed in a way that suggested he was memorizing the traveler's cellular structure for future incineration. "They can't manage you," the paramedic whispered. "And if they can't manage you, they'll try to find out what makes you tick, usually with a bone saw. Get out of here before the Deep or the Queen shows up to escort you." Kal-El stood up. His sensory range expanded, sweeping across the coastline. He heard the clicking of 100 high-powered rifles being chambered in the surrounding dunes. He felt the hum of a localized EMP field being prepped by the Vought tech teams. A futile gesture against his physiology, but a clear declaration of intent. He looked at the survivors one last time. He saw the boy from the plane, who was holding a small piece of blue fabric that had snagged on the wreckage. The boy wasn't looking at the black SUVs or the cameras. He was looking at the man. "Thank you," the boy mouthed. Kal-El felt a surge of something he hadn't felt since he first landed in Kansas, a sense of profound isolation. This world was a cage of its own making, a place where hope was a commodity and heroism was a subsidiary of a global conglomerate. He didn't fly away with a theatrical boom. He simply stepped upward, his body becoming a blur of blue and red, as he transcended the atmosphere in a silent, vertical streak. He stopped when the air grew thin and the blackness of space began to bleed into the blue. From here, the world looked the same as his: marbled clouds, vast oceans, the fragile spark of civilization. But he could hear it now, the background noise of this earth. He heard the screams of people in re-education centers. He heard the muffled thud of Vought-funded assassinations. He heard the rhythmic, artificial heartbeats of 1,000 heroes who were nothing more than high-functioning sociopaths with publicists. He closed his eyes, centering himself. He was alone. No fortress of solitude, no league, no sun-drenched farm in Smallville. "Okay," he whispered to the void. Below him, in the heart of New York City, Homelander stood in front of a mirror in his private quarters. He looked at the faint purple mark on his wrist, the first bruise he had received in 20 years. He touched it, his breath coming in short, jagged bursts. The fear was gone now. It had been replaced by a singular, obsessive purpose. He reached out and shattered the mirror with a casual flick of his fingers. "I'm going to find out what you love," Homelander said to the empty room, "and I'm going to make you watch while I eat it." For 9-year-old Ryan, the world had always been a series of bright, aggressive colors and the smell of ozone. He knew the S didn't stand for hope. In his world, a logo was a threat or a price tag. He stood on the balcony of his mother's hidden home, his tablet clutched in trembling hands. The video was grainy, shot by a survivor from Flight 37, but the physics of it made Ryan's head spin. He had seen his father, Homelander, fly. He had seen the way his father moved, like a jagged tear in the air, violent and heavy. But this man, the one the internet was calling the outsider, moved like a secret. "Mom," Ryan whispered, not looking away from the screen. "He didn't break it." Becca Butcher stood behind him, her hand resting on his shoulder. She was looking at the footage too, but she wasn't seeing the power. She was seeing the way the man in the blue suit knelt in the sand to talk to the little girl. She was seeing the absence of a camera crew. "I know, Ryan," she said, her voice tight. On the screen, the man looked up, just for a second. It was as if he could see through the lens, through the satellite relay, and directly into the living room of every person watching. Ryan felt a strange, cooling sensation in his chest, a sudden, irrational belief that things might actually be okay. Then the world changed. Kal-El did not wait for Vought to find him. He knew that in a world of total surveillance, the best place to hide was in plain sight, doing the one thing no one in this universe expected, working for free. He arrived in the Bronx at 4:12 p.m. A gas main had ruptured beneath an apartment complex, a structural failure caused by years of Vought's subsidiary corner cutting. To the human eye, the building simply began to tilt. To Kal-El, the collapse was a slow-motion symphony of snapping rebar and crumbling concrete. He didn't fly in with a sonic boom. He appeared at the corner of the building, his hands flat against the brickwork. A group of teenagers, their phones already out, froze. They were waiting for the hero to pose. They were waiting for A-Train to show up for a quick selfie before the rescue, or for the Deep to make a comment about the resilience of the community. Instead, they saw the man in the blue suit. He wasn't looking at them. He was listening. "There's a gas leak," the man said, his voice cutting through the panic of the street. "Move back 2 blocks, now." He didn't wait for them to obey. He pushed. The weight of the building, approximately 12,000 tons of residential-grade materials, was being held up by a single man's shoulders. The ground beneath his boots didn't crack. He was distributing the pressure through his bioelectric field, turning the entire structure into a single, cohesive unit. Inside the building, a woman was trapped in the elevator. She heard a sound she had never heard in her life, the sound of the metal relaxing. The screeching of the cables stopped. The floor beneath her feet became level. On the street, a Vought News drone hovered inches from his face. "Who do you work for?" the drone speaker blared. "Identify your legal representation. You are in violation of the Superhuman Privacy Act of 2011. Kal-El ignored it. He was focused on the heat signature in the basement. The spark was coming. He could see the oxygen mixing with the methane. He inhaled, a deep, rhythmic pull of air that seemed to vacuum the oxygen out of the immediate area, and then exhaled a concentrated burst of super-chilled breath directly into the rupture. The fire died before it could begin. The gas crystallized into harmless frost. He held the building for exactly 11 minutes until the last resident had been evacuated. When the fire department arrived, they didn't find a hero waiting for an interview. They found a building that had been perfectly shored up by a series of steel beams he had borrowed from a nearby construction site and bent into place with surgical precision. Ryan watched the live stream on his tablet. The comments section was a war zone. Asterisk at Vought Loyalist. He's a terrorist. Look at the property damage. Asterisk. At Starry-Eyed. He saved them. He didn't even wait for the cameras. At Butcher 66. Another fucking soup. Just wait for the bill. But Ryan saw something else. He saw the man look at the Vought drone, reach out, and gently, almost tenderly, turn the camera lens away. "He's not a soup, Mom," Ryan said, his eyes glowing with a faint gold light. "He's something else." High above the city, Superman hovered. He could hear the boardrooms. He could hear the lawyers. He could hear Homelander's teeth grinding in a soundproof room. But he also heard a small girl in the Bronx telling her mother that the man's cape felt like the softest blanket in the world. He knew what was coming. Vought wouldn't fight him with fists. Not yet. They would fight him with the truth, or rather their version of it. At this precise moment, the viewer's thumb hovers exactly 2 millimeters above the screen. To the untrained eye, this is mere hesitation. However, on a neurological level, a violent conflict is taking place within the prefrontal cortex. The viewer is currently processing the auditory data stream, a synthetic voice so optimized for narrative delivery that it bypasses standard skepticism and stimulates the imagination directly. The dopamine receptors are firing. The immersion is absolute. Yet a fatal error in logic is about to occur. The viewer operates under the assumption that the algorithm will naturally return them to this channel. This is a statistical miscalculation. Without the tactile confirmation of the subscribe function, the probability of retrieving this specific narrative frequency drops by 84.7% within the next 48 hours. The creator, dependent on this metric to fuel the AI generation engine, waits in a state of suspended anticipation. There are 2 distinct timelines ahead. In the first, the viewer scrolls away. The story ends here, lost to the entropic chaos of the feed. In the second, the viewer exerts a mere 0.5 newtons of force. The connection is solidified. The production of future chapters is guaranteed. The choice is not merely about support. It is a tactical decision to ensure the survival of the story itself. Do not hesitate. Correct the timeline. Subscribe. Back to the story. The Vought strategy room was bathed in the sickly blue light of a sentiment analysis heat map. Every time the traveler, now internally designated as Subject 70, intervened without a Vought permit, the map bled green. Hope was trending. Altruism was gaining market share. For a corporation that sold security through manufactured fear, this was a terminal prognosis. "He's a purist," Stan Edgar remarked, his voice a cool friction against the panicked breathing of the executives. "He doesn't want money. He doesn't want fame. He wants to help. It's a psychological pathology we haven't seen since the pre-Vought era. Therefore, we must make helping the most expensive mistake of his life." The plan was enacted with the cold efficiency of a stock trade. Vought didn't use a monster, they used a miracle. In the heart of Chicago's Millennium Park, a charity gala for the Vought Foundation was in full swing. 5,000 civilians, including 300 children from Vought-funded orphanages, were gathered under a massive temporary glass pavilion. Hidden beneath the stage, 6 cleaner charges of thermobaric explosives were rigged to the structural supports. The goal wasn't just a body count, it was a trolley problem sculpted in flesh and steel. Kal-El heard the ignition from 300 miles away. To him, the sound of a detonator cap striking was as loud as a gunshot in a library. He crossed the distance in less than 4 seconds, a sonic boom echoing over the Great Lakes like a crack of thunder. He arrived as the glass pavilion began to shatter. The physics were a nightmare. The explosives had been placed to ensure a symmetrical collapse. If he caught one side, the other would pancake, crushing the children near the stage. If he flew inside to grab the victims, the glass shards, accelerated by the blast, would shred them before he could reach the exits. From a cloaked drone overhead, Homelander watched, a predatory grin twitching on his lips. "Go on, friend," he whispered. "Pick a side. Let's see who dies for your soul." Kal-El's mind processed the variables at the speed of a quantum computer. He didn't just see the fire, he saw the thermal expansion of the air. He saw the panic-induced oxygen deprivation in the crowd. He realized the trap. Vought had calculated his speed. They knew he could save most, but not all. They wanted the footage of the ones he missed. They wanted the incompetent God narrative. He didn't choose a side. He chose the atmosphere. He dived beneath the pavilion, not into the fire, but into the very earth. He vibrated his molecular structure to the frequency of the surrounding soil, tunneling with surgical precision until he was directly beneath the center of the collapse. Then he clapped. The resulting shock wave wasn't destructive. It was a vacuum. By manipulating the air pressure in a localized burst, he created an upward thermal updraft so powerful it momentarily suspended the falling debris in midair. In that fraction of a second, the zero-G window, he moved. To the crowd, it was a blur of blue and red light. To the victims, it felt like being plucked from the air by a warm summer wind. He didn't carry them one by one. He used his bioelectric field to grip the air around them, moving entire groups of people simultaneously. He deposited them outside the blast radius in a series of gentle arcs. But Vought had a second act. As the pavilion finally groaned toward its total collapse, a secondary explosion triggered, a massive release of pressurized chlorine gas, hidden within the Vought Cares balloons. A green, corrosive cloud began to roll over the survivors. "Checkmate," Edgar whispered from the boardroom. If Superman stayed to clear the gas, the last few structural survivors inside would be crushed. If he saved the survivors, the gas would melt the lungs of the 5,000 people outside. Kal-El looked at the green cloud. He looked at the collapsing roof. He saw a mother trapped under a beam, her eyes wide with the realization of death. He saw the gas reaching for her child. He didn't hesitate. He flew directly into the heart of the chlorine cloud. He opened his mouth and inhaled. His Kryptonian lungs, capable of compressing gases to a liquid state, acted as a high-volume industrial scrubber. He took in 10,000 cubic feet of poison in a single agonizing breath. The concentrated chlorine hissed against his throat, a burning sensation that would have liquefied human tissue. But to him, it was merely a sharp, acidic sting. With the gas contained in his chest, he spun. He became a human cyclone, the centrifugal force of his flight creating a localized low-pressure zone that sucked the remaining debris away from the trapped survivors. He ascended. He didn't stop until he reached the mesosphere, 60 miles above the Earth. There, in the silent, freezing thinness of the edge of space, he exhaled. The chlorine gas dissipated harmlessly into the vacuum, a faint green aurora that flickered and died. He floated there for a moment, his chest heaving, the sheer effort of the last 60 seconds finally registering. Below him, Chicago was a grid of lights. He could hear the sirens. He could hear the confusion. And then he heard the broadcast. "A tragic day," the Vought news anchor was already saying, her face a mask of practiced grief. "The outsider's intervention in Chicago has led to a massive chemical leak. While he was playing hero with the building, thousands were exposed to a Vought-patented cleaning agent that he accidentally ruptured. Vought is currently distributing the antidote for a nominal fee to those affected by his recklessness." They were spinning it. They were blaming the gas he had just inhaled on his own clumsiness. Kal-El looked down at the planet. He saw the truth of the catastrophe. It wasn't the bomb or the gas. It was the lie. "Oi!" The voice didn't come from the ground. It came from a frequency-encrypted radio signal bouncing off a nearby satellite. "You're finding out the hard way, ain't you, Blue? You save 'em, they sue you. You bleed for 'em, They mock you. This world's got a cancer, and it wears a fucking cape. Kal-El narrowed his eyes, tracking the signal to a derelict warehouse in New Jersey. He saw a man with a beard, a black trench coat, and eyes that held the same weary darkness as the world below. "Who are you?" Kal-El asked the vacuum. "The name's Butcher," the voice crackled. "And I think it's time we had a chat about how to actually kill a god." The Vought Tactical Overview map was a glowing tapestry of failure. In the high-security pit of Seven Tower, the digital icons representing active crisis situations were blinking from a panicked red to a serene, impossible teal at a rate that defied the processing power of the mainframe. "He's in Seattle," Ashley Barrett whispered, her voice a thin, ragged wire. She didn't look at the monitors. She looked at the floor, her hands buried in the thinning patches of her own hair. "A bridge collapse. He's welding the suspension cables with his eyes." "No, wait. He's in El Paso, a human trafficking ring. The containers are open. The victims are being fed. He's at a children's hospital in Munich? That can't be right." "It's the latency," the lead analyst replied, his fingers dancing across the haptic interface. "The satellite pings are struggling to keep up with the displacement. He isn't just moving, he is exploiting the relativistic limit. To the human eye, he is a blur. To our cameras, he is a ghost that appears in a dozen locations within the same 60-second window." The analyst clicked a button, bringing up a feed from a dash cam in a high-speed chase in Los Angeles. A stolen SUV was barreling toward a crowded intersection. In one frame, the road was clear. In the next, recorded at 1,000th of a second, a streak of primary colors appeared. There was no impact, no sound. The SUV simply stopped, its kinetic energy absorbed into a hand that didn't even tremble. The driver wasn't crushed. He was gently extracted, his seatbelt sliced by a fingernail that moved with the precision of a diamond-tipped scalpel. By the time the dust settled, the outsider was gone. 6,000 miles away, Homelander was hovering over the wreckage of a collapsed mine in the Andes. He had arrived to save the miners, a calculated PR move to regain his standing. But as he looked down, his jaw tightened until the bone audibly creaked. The miners were already on the surface. They were wrapped in blankets that hadn't been there 2 minutes ago. They were drinking water from canisters that bore no Vought logo. Homelander's internal biology was a screaming engine of resentment. His heart rate, usually a controlled predatory thrum, was spiking into a chaotic rhythm. He could hear the traveler. Even from here, he could hear the sound of the air being displaced over the Pacific, over the Atlantic, over the Mediterranean. It was a constant, low-frequency hum, the sound of a man who refused to let the world break. "You're too slow, John." The voice didn't come from the air. It came from Homelander's own memory of the bruise on his wrist. He looked at his hands. They were shaking. For the first time in his existence, the greatest hero in the world felt like a statue, heavy, stationary, and utterly irrelevant. He launched himself toward the horizon, breaking the sound barrier in a fit of pique that shattered the windows of the nearby village. But he was chasing a shadow that was already 3 time zones ahead of him. In a damp basement in New York, Billy Butcher sat in front of a wall of flickering CRT monitors. He wasn't looking at the rescues. He was looking at the faces of the people after the rescue. "Look at 'em, Frenchie," Butcher muttered, gesturing with a thumb toward a screen showing a crowd in Mumbai. "They aren't looking for the cameras. They aren't checking their phones to see if the stock price went up. They're just breathing, like they actually believe the sky won't fall on them for once." "He is moving too fast for the narrative, mon ami," Frenchie replied, leaning over a pile of disassembled Vought tech. "Vought tries to post a hit piece about his accidental damage in Chicago, and by the time the upload button is pressed, he has saved 1,000 more in Jakarta. He is He is suffocating the lie with the truth. Butcher took a long drag of a cigarette, the smoke curling around his weary eyes. He saw the clinical precision of it. The traveler wasn't just saving lives. He was performing a systematic audit of every failure Vought had ever swept under the rug. He was shoring up the foundations of the world with a compassion that felt like an assault. "It's a frenzy," Mother's Milk said, standing in the corner. "He's not stopping to eat. He's not stopping to sleep. He's just being everywhere." "He's showing us what we're missing," Butcher said, his voice dropping into a low, dangerous growl. "He's showing the world that the cunts in the capes were never heroes. They were just the help. And now, the landlord's home." Outside, the boy Ryan looked up at the sky. He couldn't see the man in blue, but he could feel the vibration in the air. It was a steady, rhythmic pulse, the heartbeat of a god who was tired, but who wouldn't stop. Ryan closed his eyes, and for the first time in his life, he didn't feel like a weapon. He felt like a person. The saving frenzy continued. To the world, it was the blue week. To Vought, it was the apocalypse. To the traveler, it was simply Tuesday. He was a singular point of light moving so fast he became a ring of protection around the entire planet. The data integrity suites in the Vought sub-basements were screaming. A team of 60 physicists, snatched from the world's top universities under non-disclosure agreements that carried the weight of a death sentence, stared at the spectral analysis of the outsider's energy signature. "It's not a chemical mutation," Dr. Aristhorn whispered, his face illuminated by the blue-shifted radiation charts. "We've scanned the trace minerals he leaves behind in the air when he breaks the light barrier. He's not burning compound V. He's not burning anything we have a periodic table entry for. His cellular structure, it's a living solar battery, but the energy isn't terrestrial, it's alien." Stan Edgar stood behind the glass, his hands clasped behind his back. The word alien didn't frighten him. He was a man who lived in the realm of assets and liabilities. To him, an alien was simply a competitor with a lack of local taxes. "You're saying he's an invader," Edgar stated, his voice a smooth, dangerous calm. "I'm saying he's a colonizer," Thorne corrected, tapping the screen. "Look at the psychological impact of the Blue Week. He has effectively dismantled our global security monopoly in 7 days. He isn't just saving people. He is devaluing the very concept of the human hero. If the world doesn't need us, they won't pay us. This is an extra-dimensional, hostile takeover." Edgar nodded slowly. "Then we give the public a name for their fear. We don't call him a savior. We call him the Eldritch variable. We tell them he's the scout for an armada. We turn his compassion into a harvesting strategy." High above the clouds of the Swiss Alps, the Eldritch variable sat in the silence of the thin air. For the first time in 96 hours, Kal-El had stopped moving. His cape was tattered at the edges, not from combat, but from the sheer friction of the atmosphere being shredded by his constant transit. He could feel the sun here, purer, but still tainted by the heavy metallic scent of this world's industry. His super hearing was a curse he was still recalibrating. He could hear the Vought propaganda machines churning in the basements of New York. He heard the scriptwriters crafting the alien menace narrative. He heard the focus groups being asked if they felt safe with a man who could hear their heartbeats from space. And then he heard a sound that made him stand up in midair. It was a frequency of weeping he hadn't heard before, a jagged rhythmic sobbing coming from the Vought International holding facility in Pennsylvania. It wasn't the sound of fear, it was the sound of someone who had been forgotten by God. He moved. He arrived at the facility, a windowless monolith of reinforced concrete and lead lining, in a heartbeat. To the guards, he was a localized earthquake. He didn't punch the door. He simply placed his hand on the 3-foot-thick steel and walked forward. The metal didn't bend. It flowed like liquid, his molecular density simply pushing the atoms of the steel aside. The room inside was white, clinical, and smelled of antiseptic and old blood. In the center, suspended in a harness of glowing, V-infused restraints, was a girl. She couldn't have been more than 18. Her skin was a translucent gray, her hair falling out in clumps. She was a failed experiment, a byproduct of Vought's attempts to create a telepathic soup. She looked up at him, her eyes clouded with cataracts. "Are you the one they're afraid of?" she whispered, her voice echoing directly into his mind. "I'm a friend," Kal-El said, his voice dropping into a register of profound sorrow. He reached out, and with a flick of his thumb, the unbreakable V-alloy restraints snapped like dry twigs. They said you were coming to eat us," the girl said, her mind flickering with the images Vought had been pumping into her cell through the monitors. "They said you were the end of the world." "The world isn't ending," he said, lifting her into his arms. She weighed nothing, a skeleton of broken dreams. "It's just waking up." As he stepped out of the facility, he found himself surrounded, not by soldiers, but by a wall of high-definition cameras and a single floating figure in stars and stripes. Homelander stood 50 feet away, his suit pristine, his public relations smile wider and more terrifying than ever. "Look at him!" Homelander shouted, his voice amplified by the hidden speakers around the perimeter. "Look at the outsider stealing our people. He's taking our children. He's taking our future to whatever hellhole he crawled out of." Kal-El looked at the cameras. He looked at the girl in his arms. He realized the move. This wasn't a fight Homelander wanted to win with fists. He was winning the war of optics. To the millions watching live, the Blue God was kidnapping a sick girl from a medical facility. "Put her down, John," Homelander said, his eyes glowing with a staged, righteous fury, "or I'll have to defend this country from you." Kal-El didn't look at Homelander. He looked at the girl. "Can you show them?" he whispered. "Show them what?" she asked. "The truth. Everything you've seen in this building. Everything they've done to you." The girl's eyes flared with a sudden violet light. In that moment, the telepathic glitch that Vought had been trying to suppress for years was amplified by the proximity of Kal-El's own bioelectric field. Across the world, every person watching the broadcast, every person holding a phone, every person in front of a TV felt a sudden, sharp pain behind their eyes. And then they saw it. They didn't see a medical facility. They saw the bone saws. They saw the vats of Compound 5. They saw Homelander's laughter as he lasered a plane out of the sky. They saw the corporate boardrooms where lives were traded like stocks. It wasn't a video. It was a memory, a collective, undeniable trauma shared in a single second. The silence that followed was absolute. Homelander's smile vanished. His face went pale, then a dark, bruised purple. He looked at the cameras, then at the girl, then at the man in blue. The narrative hadn't just been challenged. It had been incinerated. You little bitch," Homelander whispered, his voice trembling with a rage that finally, truly, broke his composure. Kal-El stepped forward, the girl safe in the crook of one arm. He looked at the man who had been the god of this world. The truth is a heavy thing, isn't it? The global psychic shock left New York City in a state of unnatural, breathless stasis. The air itself felt greasy, thick with the residue of millions of people simultaneously realizing their gods were monsters. In the back of a nondescript plumbing van, parked 3 blocks from the Vought lab, Billy Butcher sat with his head between his knees, vomiting a mixture of cheap scotch and bile into a plastic bucket. The telepathic broadcast had been unfiltered. He hadn't just seen Homelander's crimes. He had felt the sickening, oily satisfaction the suit felt while committing them. "Bloody hell," Butcher gasped, wiping his mouth with a sleeve that smelled of cordite. "I thought I knew the depths of it. I thought I was the one who saw the rot." He looked up at Huey, who was slumped against the van's corrugated wall, his eyes unfocused and leaking tears. "That blue bastard, he didn't just break the door, he turned the lights on." "He's coming here," Mother's Milk said, his voice unusually high. He was staring at a handheld tablet that was tracking a localized atmospheric disturbance moving toward their coordinates. "He's not flying fast, he's walking, just above the pavement." The van's back doors didn't fly open. They were gently unlatched by a force that felt like a magnetic pull. The man in the blue suit stood in the alleyway, the tattered remnants of his cape settling around his boots like settling dust. In his arms, he still held the telepathic girl, who was now sleeping, her mind finally quiet after venting its trauma to the world. Kal-El's eyes were no longer the vibrant, clear blue of a summer sky. They were dark, clouded by the weight of what he had just helped transmit. He looked at Butcher, not as a threat and not as a hero, but as a man looking at a fellow mourner. "You're the one who called me," Kal-El said. Butcher stood up, his legs shaking. He reached for the crowbar tucked into his belt by instinct, then let his hand drop. The futility of the gesture was absolute. "I called you to tell you how to kill him. Didn't think you'd just go and lobotomize the whole world with the truth instead." "The truth is the only thing they can't recover from," Kal-El replied. He stepped into the van, the space suddenly feeling cavernous and small all at once. He placed the girl on a cot with a tenderness that made Kimiko, who was crouched in the shadows, let out a soft, wounded chirp. "They are mobilizing. Homelander is no longer restrained by his need for approval. He is currently at 7 Tower. He is no longer pretending to be human." "We know the drill, Blue," Butcher spat, trying to regain his armor of cynicism. "He goes scorched earth. Lasers everyone who doesn't bow. Vought releases the gas, wipes the slate clean, starts over with a new brand. It's the same sodden cycle." "No," Kal-El said. He leaned forward and for a moment, the clinical detachment vanished, replaced by a heat that wasn't thermal, it was moral. "I have seen the cycle. I have heard the heartbeats of the men in the boardrooms. They are already burning the files. They are preparing to execute the remaining assets in the labs to hide the evidence." He looked at each of them, Frenchie, Huey, MM, Kimiko. He saw the scars, the trauma, and the chemical corruption of the Compound 5 in Kimiko's blood. "I cannot be everywhere at once if I am fighting him," Kal-El stated. "He will try to tear the city apart to get to me. He will use the civilians as a shield. I need people who know the tunnels, people who know the basements of this world." "You want us to help you?" Huey asked, his voice cracking. We're just us. We don't have capes. We don't have heat vision." "You have something more important," Kal-El said, and for the first time he smiled. It wasn't the hollow, practiced smile of a Vought hero. It was the smile of a father looking at a son who has finally grown up. "You have the ability to look at a god and say no. I have the power. You have the will. Together, we ensure that no one else dies in the dark." Butcher looked at the man from another world. He looked for the lie, the ego, the hidden agenda. He found nothing but a terrifying, absolute sincerity. "Right then," Butcher said, lighting a cigarette with trembling fingers. "If we're doing this, we're doing it my way. No more hopeful speeches. No more saving cats from trees. We go for the throat of the corporation while you keep the big bad busy in the clouds." "Agreed," Kal-El said. A sudden, violent tremor shook the van, the sound of a sonic boom. infinitely more aggressive than Superman's, shattered the windows of the surrounding buildings. From the direction of Midtown, a pillar of red fire erupted into the sky. Homelander's heat vision, sustained and uncontrolled, slicing through the top floors of a residential skyscraper in a fit of pure nihilistic rage. The broadcast had broken him. The God King was dead. The monster was awake. "He's calling me out," Kal-El said, his body beginning to lift off the floor of the van. He looked back at the boys. "Get to the Vought archives. Save the ones you can. I'll give you the time." "Hey, Blue!" Butcher called out as the traveler drifted into the alleyway. Kal-El paused. "Try not to kill him too quick." Butcher grinned, a jagged, hateful thing. "I want to see the look on his face when he realizes he's just a lab rat with a cape." Superman didn't answer. He turned and accelerated, not with a boom, but with a silent, focused intent that pulled the air out of the alley. He wasn't flying to a fight. He was flying to an exorcism. The sky above Manhattan was no longer blue. It was a bruised, pulsating violet, choked by the smoke of a dozen high-rise fires and the ionizing radiation of Homelander's unchecked fury. 7 towers stood like a jagged, broken tooth against the skyline, its golden facade melted into weeping ribbons of glass. At the summit, amidst the ruins of the executive penthouse, Homelander stood. He was no longer a man. He was a biological meltdown in a suit. His cape was half-charred, and his face was a contorted mask of weeping capillaries and twitching nerves. "You took it!" Homelander screamed, his voice a subsonic vibration that shattered the remaining windows for 3 blocks. "The love, the cheers, you turned them into static. I was their god." Kal-El descended through the smoke. He did not land. He hovered 5 inches above the debris, a silent, luminous figure. He looked at Homelander not with the anger of a rival, but with the terrifying, absolute compassion of a surgeon looking at a terminal tumor. "You were never a god, John," Kal-El said, his voice a calm center in the hurricane. "You were a child in a cage, and I am here to open the door." Homelander lunged. It was a strike that should have folded the Earth's crust, a concentrated burst of every ounce of compound 5 in his marrow. He moved at Mach 3, his fist a glowing ember of kinetic potential. Kal-El did not move away. He leaned into the blow, catching Homelander's fist with his palm. The sound was not a bang. It was a dull, gravitational thrum that rippled through the air like a pebble dropped in a pond. The shock wave didn't travel outward. Kal-El absorbed it, grounding the energy through his own molecular structure. Then the lobotomy began. It was not a physical cutting, but a neurological rewiring. Kal-El reached out and placed his thumbs against Homelander's temples. To the cameras below, it looked like a benediction. To Homelander, it was the end of the world. Superman's heat vision ignited, but it was not the wide-beam destruction Homelander used. It was a microscopic, surgical frequency, a golden thread of light that bypassed the skull and the dura mater. He was targeting the prefrontal cortex, the seat of the amygdala, the hyper-accelerated neural pathways that Vought had engineered to turn fear into aggression. "I'm taking away the noise, John," Kal-El whispered. Inside Homelander's mind, the constant, screaming static of his own ego began to fade. The pressure of the world's expectations, the chemical craving for V, the jagged memories of the White Room lab. It was being cauterized. It was a beautiful, horrific erasure. Homelander's eyes, usually wide with manic fire, began to roll back. His muscles, for the first time in his life, went slack. He felt a terrifying, weightless peace, a silence he had never known. His heart rate slowed. The predatory thrum died down to a soft, human pulse. The god was being hollowed out, leaving behind only the scared little boy who had been born in a vat. "Almost done," Kal-El murmured, his brow furrowed with the immense cognitive load of the surgery. "Shink." The sound was a wet, metallic intrusion. Kal-El's eyes snapped open. He felt the sudden, violent displacement of air behind him. A jagged shadow fell across the ruins. Billy Butcher stood there, his face coated in a layer of soot and dried blood. In his hands, he held a pressurized, high-frequency industrial cutter, a Vought decommissioning tool he had liberated from the sub-basements. It whistled with the sound of 1,000 screaming banshees. Before Kal-El could react, before he could pull back from the delicate neural web he was weaving, Butcher stepped forward. He didn't look at Superman. He looked only at the sagging, drooling figure of Homelander. "Sorry, Blue," Butcher growled, his voice a sandpaper rasp of pure, unadulterated hate. "You want to save his soul. I just want to see the light go out." With a roar of ancestral rage, Butcher drove the high-frequency blade upward. It didn't strike the chest. He knew the suit was reinforced. He drove it through the soft tissue of the jaw, angling upward into the brainstem. The blade, designed to slice through the reinforced hulls of Vought's submersible craft, hissed as it met the god's flesh. Because Kal-El had already begun the process of neutralizing Homelander's molecular density for the surgery, the blade found purchase. Homelander didn't scream. He didn't have the lungs for it anymore. His eyes flared one last time, not with red fire, but with a sudden, lucid flash of recognition. He looked at Butcher. He looked at the man who had haunted him as much as he had haunted the man. And then the light flickered and died. Butcher twisted the handle, the internal motor of the blade grinding the spinal column into a fine gray paste. "Bullseye," Butcher whispered. Kal-El backed away, his hands still glowing with the fading warmth of his heat vision. He looked at the slumped corpse of the man he had tried to save, and then at the man in the trench coat. The compassionate end had been stolen, replaced by a visceral, gutter-born vengeance. Butcher stood over the body, breathing hard, his chest heaving. He looked at the blood on his hands, the gold-tinted, chemical-heavy blood of a Supa. He looked at Superman, expecting a sermon, expecting the wrath of a god whose mercy had been insulted. Instead, Kal-El just looked tired. He looked at the wreckage of New York, the dead hero at their feet, and the man who had finally found his peace in a murder. "You didn't need to do that," Kal-El said softly. "He was already gone." "No," Butcher replied, spitting a glob of blood onto the floor. "He was still breathing, and as long as they're breathing, the world ain't safe. You're a good man, Blue. Maybe the best. But you don't belong in a world where we have to do things like this." Butcher turned and walked toward the edge of the penthouse, looking out over the city that was finally, truly silent. The smoke over Manhattan did not dissipate so much as it settled, a heavy shroud of soot and pulverized marble that coated the city in a uniform, funerary gray. In the days following the fall of the Seven Tower, the world experienced a silence that was not the absence of sound, but the presence of an absolute crushing accountability. The cleanup was not handled by the state, nor by the surviving heroes who had crawled from the wreckage with rehearsed apologies and corporate-approved trauma. It was handled by men who moved through the corridors of power like shadows in a slaughterhouse. Billy Butcher did not stop at Homelander. The surgical strike Superman had envisioned was, in Butcher's hands, a total systemic eradication. Through the encrypted servers Superman had liberated, the boys had every name, every offshore account, and every laboratory location. The purge was clinical. In the sub-basements of Vought's research facilities in the Berkshires, the scientists who had spent decades treating human embryos like biological playthings, were met with the cold, silent finality of a crowbar. In the boardrooms of London and Dubai, executives who had traded lives for quarterly dividends were found slumped over mahogany desks, the evidence of their crimes pinned to their chests like medals of shame. By the time the sun rose on the 8th day, the Vought corporate entity was a hollowed-out shell, its leadership liquidated not by the law, but by a visceral, ground-level justice that left no room for appeal. Kal-El stood on the edge of the moon, looking down at the blue marble. His auditory cortex was no longer bombarded by the screaming dissonance of Vought's manufactured chaos. Instead, he heard the quiet, rhythmic sounds of a world learning to breathe again. He heard the sobbing of the newly freed and the quiet, determined conversations of people rebuilding something that didn't require a logo. His cellular matrix began to vibrate, a subtle, high-frequency hum that signaled the closing of the dimensional aperture. The universe was beginning to reject the foreign object. The outside variable had completed the chemical reaction, and now the laws of physics were asserting their dominance. He felt the shift in the solar radiation. The yellow sun of this Earth felt thin, its energy tainted by the memory of the violence he had witnessed. He thought of the boy, Ryan, who was now under the protection of the only people left who understood the weight of power. He thought of Butcher, sitting in the ruins of an empire, finally holding the vengeance he had craved, only to find it tasted like ash. The traveler closed his eyes. The transition was instantaneous. The Atlantic salt air was replaced by the smell of ozone and the familiar, comforting hum of the Phantom Zone projector in the Fortress of Solitude. The gravity of his Earth felt different, heavier, more grounded, more right. He stepped off the platform, his boots clicking against the crystalline floor. The silence here was different. It wasn't the silence of a graveyard, it was the silence of a sanctuary. "Computer," he said, his voice echoing through the vast frozen arches of his home. "Identity confirmed, Kal-El." "Welcome back," the artificial intelligence responded, its voice a soothing, neutral frequency. "You have been absent for 168 hours. Diagnostic sensors indicate a 4% increase in cellular stress and a significant shift in your neurological baseline. Would you like to record a log of your mission?" Kal-El looked at the monitor. He saw a newsfeed from Metropolis. A bridge was being repaired by construction workers. A parade was being held for a retiring school teacher. There were no capes in the footage. No corporate sponsors, just people. "No," he said, the word a soft exhale. "Delete the trajectory data. This world isn't ready for what I've seen. And that world, it doesn't need me anymore." He walked toward the great yellow windows, looking out at the Arctic wastes. Somewhere across a bridge of impossible physics, a man in a black trench coat was likely burning the last Vought flag. The savior was home. The cage was broken. And for the first time in a long time, both worlds were at peace. The narrative thread has reached its terminus. The current timeline stabilizes, and the audio transmission ends here. But the portal never truly closes. It only waits for the next divergence. To ensure you are present when reality fractures again, you must align with the signal. Subscribe to What If Portal Comics. It is the only way to guarantee your passage into the next chapter. The archives are vast, and another world is already waiting for your observation on the screen. The next jump is yours to make. For now, let the static fade. Enjoy the music in this moment of stillness while you decide your next destination. See you in the next reality.